Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do my third quarter book haul and book unhaul. Alright guys, it is time to see which books I have brought into my library over the last 3 months, as well as which books I have decided I no longer need on my shelves. This is my first time really doing a actual quarterly book haul slash unhaul. I technically did one last quarter, but I did it for 5 months instead of actually 3 months. So this is the first official quarterly book haul slash unhaul, and I would say the numbers are a lot more reasonable here. If I counted correctly, I believe I hauled about 28 books, and I have about 12 books that I want to unhaul. I will go ahead and start with the unhaul portion since there are less books there, and then we'll get into the books that I'm hauling. As always, I'm not going to go too deep into what these books are about, just because otherwise this video would be very, very long. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into the unhauls. I'm going to go ahead and separate these into technically 3 different piles. So one pile only has 1 book in it, and that is a author I'm unhauling because it was brought to my attention that they are a very problematic person, and obviously I don't want them on my shelves anymore. Then we have books that I have read in this last quarter that I've decided I don't need to keep on my shelves, and then we have books that have been sitting on my shelves for a little while, but I did a little bit of a clean sweep and decided I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them now. So let's start with the problematic one. That is going to be The Hearts Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I did end up making a post about this when I first found out that this author is a TERF. They are a transphobe. They are friends with J.K. Rowling. I made a post apologizing because I had mentioned it in a video recently, obviously praising this book because it was one of my top books of last year. But as soon as I found out that this author was someone who hated the trans community, I support the trans community 100%. I wanted to let people know that I am so sorry for talking about this book, praising this book, and trying to get more people to read it. Obviously, this is an author we should not be supporting, so I will obviously be removing him from my shelves and never discussing his works again. So again, apologies, it is being removed, and I am now aware of the monster that this man is. So, sayonara. Up next, the books that I read this quarter that I just didn't like enough to keep. Technically, one of these I think I read before this quarter, and that is What Moves the Dead. But I did end up this quarter reading What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher, and I just decided that I am not going to continue with this series. These books have kind of been middle of the road for me, and while I definitely can see myself reading more T. Kingfisher, since this is technically all I've read from her, this series is not going to be something I'm continuing, and I didn't enjoy it enough to keep it on my shelves. This one, I can't remember if I gave it a 4 or a 3.5, but this one was definitely a relatively low 3, and T. Kingfisher is a relatively popular author, so I'm sure someone else would enjoy having these on their shelves more than I would. Up next, a book I just recently read, and that is The Wicked Bargain by Gabe Cole Nova. This book left me a little bit disappointed. It was a kind of low 3.5 star rating for me, and I usually feel like I want to have more like 4 stars and above kept on my shelves. This is a queer young adult story. We are following like a pirate with some magical abilities, has trans representation. There's a lot of good things in this book, but I struggled a little bit with the pacing of the story and the fact that I think it wasn't fleshed out enough for what is essentially a standalone. But again, this is a book that has a lot of great representation in it. it, so hopefully someone else will be able to pick it up and enjoy it. Next we have Under the Udula Tree by Chinelo Oparanta, and this was a book I ended up DNFing. I'm not a big lit fic person. It is not uncommon for me to DNF a literary fiction book, and unfortunately this was just the most recent victim of that. I bought a few BL mangas and have read a couple of them. The first one is Bite Marks and Fluorite, and the second one is There Are Things I Can't Tell You. Both of these, I think this was a 3.5 and this was a 4-star, but I just know that I'm never going to read these again. They are, I believe, just one-offs, and I know that manga is kind of expensive, so I'm sure someone would like to get them at a discounted price. Then a few books that have been on my shelves for a while that I just decided don't need to be there anymore. First, we have Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. This is an author that I've just decided isn't for me. Also, I hear more and more that he just isn't that good at writing women. He's got a lot of misogynistic stuff going on there. I always remember reading this book that the female characters, you just feel a little weird reading about them, and there's also some other aspects of this book that I didn't love. I think I kept it because it really kind of was my first experience with translated fiction as well as magical realism, so it really stood out compared to other books that I have read. Since then, I've obviously read other books within these genres that have done it better, so there's no reason for me to keep it on my shelf. Up next, we have People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I do really like Emily Henry, but this is probably my least favorite book by hers. I believe this is the one that's being turned into a movie, so it's a bummer that the one I like the least is being turned into a movie, but I just know that I'm never going to go ahead and read this again, especially as I move away more and more from contemporary hetero romance, especially the traditionally published stuff, so I'm just making room for other books. Talking about contemporary hetero romance that is traditionally published, I have Loathe to Love You by Ali Hazelwood. Again, another of my favorite authors who I just haven't picked up for a while because I'm reading primarily queer stuff right now, but this was the collection of 3 short stories. I think maybe one of them got 4 stars. The others were kind of like in the 3.5 star range. I'm not a big short story girly, especially when it comes to romances, so it is probably best for me to go ahead and pass this on because I'm never gonna reread it again. Last 2 unhauls, we have The Life of Pi by Yana Martel. I really did enjoy this book when I read it many years ago, and I also enjoyed the movie. It was one of those rare movies where I was like, yeah, this is about as good as the book, but I also know that I'm just never gonna reread it or really recommend it because it's been so long since I've read it that I don't remember much about it, so I'm gonna go ahead and get it off my shelves. And then finally, another short story collection, we have The Toughest Indian in the World by Sherman Alexie. This was my first work by them and kind of made me realize that I do like his writing, and I'm sure I'll read more from him, but again, I'm never gonna return to these short stories because I'm not a big short story girly, so there's not really any reason for me to keep it on my shelves. All right, so those were all the unhauls. Let's go ahead and get into the, I think, like 28 books that I have hauled here in the last 3 months. These aren't really in any sort of particular order. I'm gonna go ahead and start with some of the Aardvark books that I got because I do occasionally get books from them, then the 3 nonfictions, and then just the rest that I got. Up first, we have The Once and Future Me by Melissa Pace. This is a sci-fi, I believe maybe even thriller story. It was compared to Blake Crouch's work, and I'm a big fan of his work, so I went ahead and decided to pick it up. I believe she wakes up and finds herself being placed into a psychiatric hospital and doesn't really remember anything before that, and is suffering from hallucinations and is trying to get to the bottom of what is happening to her. Up next, we have You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. Andrew Joseph White is an author that I have really enjoyed in the past. In fact, there are two of their books right there. This is their debut into adult novels, so I am really excited. So far, I've heard mostly good things about it. This is horror and also sci-fi. I believe we are dealing with a alien invasion with kind of a hive mentality, and we have a trans character who ends up getting pregnant at the hands of a very abusive partner, and this hive alien group is trying to force them to go through with this pregnancy. So obviously there's going to be some pretty serious body horror in here. Andrew Joseph White does that really well. Am I scared to read this? 100%. Another author that I really enjoy, we have Chuck Tingle and his book Lucky Day. This is relatively short, but it is supposed to be a very weird horror story. We are following a statistician, and I believe she is part of this event that is called low probability event, where a bunch of people die in like ways that people usually should not die, and they all do that kind of at the same time, and her life is kind of thrown into chaos. And I believe she starts helping someone look into a very lucky casino that may have something to do with that event. I've heard mixed things about the story, but I think it really depends on how kooky you like your books. I will be intrigued to see what I end up thinking. The final aardvark book that I've gotten in the last 3 months is going to be Coffin Moon by Keith Rosen. This is a vampire story. I recently saw Gabby talking about this book, and she ended up really liking it, so that has me feeling really optimistic about it. I think I decided to pick this up because I was on the high from Grady Hendrix' Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and so I was really feeling vampires. In this book, we are following a man who I believe has returned from the Vietnam War. He's very broken. He and his wife, I believe, are caring for his niece, and he ends up getting into some beef with a guy who, unfortunately for him, ends up being a vampire and I believe kills his wife. And so he and his niece end up kind of going out to see if they can hunt down this vampire and get some revenge. So it sounds right up my alley, and hopefully I love it as much as other people have been. All right, as far as nonfictions go, the one that I have read so far is Poverty by Matthew Desmond. I gave this 5 stars. This is the author of Evicted. I absolutely love his work, so I was super happy to go ahead and pick up his newest work, which is obviously discussing why America, which is supposed to be such a wealthy and powerful country, has so much poverty in it. Even after all these years, this issue is just not being resolved. I would definitely say that this is a book that everyone should pick up. The other book I ended up picking up because it was buy one get one 50% off, so I got the Poverty book, and then I also got Cultish by Amanda Montell. This is just a book that I've heard good things about. It's older, but I feel like, especially as like Christian nationalism and the MAGA movement and everything is like growing, and a lot of their behavior is very cultish, it would be very interesting to learn a little bit more about the languages that cults use and maybe being able to compare it to what we see in today's society. And then the third one I actually saw on a cart where everything was just like $1, so this book was literally $1, and that is Our Class: Trauma and Transformation in an American Prison by Chris Hedges. It says, Our Class is both a haunting account of how our penal system disproportionately affects the most disadvantaged among us and a moving testament of the transformative power of art. So I often like reading nonfictions that include discussions about the education system. Even though I'm not a part of the education system anymore, I still understand that the education system impacts my life because it is teaching and growing the people that will be living by my side and potentially caring for me one day when I'm old and decrepit. All right, now going into just the rest of the books that I have picked up over the last 3 months. We first have The Devil's Mark by Lark Taylor. I ended up reading a book by this author on KU, and technically this is available on KU as well, but I would like to go ahead and own these books physically because I loved it so much. This is the first book in a series. The book that I read is the first book in a companion series, but this series actually comes first, hence why I decided I wanted to read this. This is kind of like a paranormal romance because we are dealing with angels and demons and vampires and werewolves, and in this one we are specifically following the sons of Lucifer as they find their human mates, and all of these are queer. So very excited to get into this. Up next we have Curvy Girl Summer, and that is by Daniela Allen. This I have heard wonderful things about. I also think the cover is stunning. We are obviously following a contemporary romance between this woman and this man. I believe that this is the bartender trope where we have a woman who's trying to get her dating life together, and she keeps meeting guys at this one bar and it doesn't work out, and she ends up forming a connection with the bartender. So I don't think I've ever read that trope before, but I'm ready to check it out. I know that I said I wasn't really reading hetero romances, but this has other forms of diversity in it, so it made the cut. Up next we have Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. I did end up recently reading Pet and really enjoying it. This is a prequel to that where we are following the main character's mother, and she is an artist whose paintings every once in a while just kind of come to life and cause a little bit of mayhem. Her paintings seek to hunt down monsters. This book is set before all the monsters in the world were arrested and everything. In Pet, essentially monsters don't exist anymore because they were arrested, the streets were cleaned and everything, and this kind of takes place before all of that happened. Up next we have a book that could be used as a weapon because it is literally the heaviest book that I own, and that is When the Tide Held the Moon by Vanessa Vida Kelly. This is a book that like everybody has been reading and really enjoying, and I was lucky enough to find a relatively cheap used copy of it on Pango, so I decided to go ahead and snatch this up. This is a historical fantasy story, and the author is actually the artist of all the art that you see in this book. So that is very impressive. But we are, I believe, on Coney Island, and it's kind of giving The Greatest Showman vibes. And we have this man who's working for the show, and he has been tasked with watching over their newest exhibit, which is this merman, and the two of them end up forming a relationship. I have heard that this is very slow burn, that it is possibly a little bit more historical than romance focused, but since I've heard so many amazing things about it, I am excited to try it out. Let's talk about some books that I recently purchased on my trip to Bellingham. Since I just recently posted a vlog of me going there, I'm not going to talk too much about these books. The first is going to be Breadfruit by Celestina Yeti. This is a contemporary romance story. I believe the characters are Pacific Islander, and I hear that it talks a lot about the culture as well as the impacts of colonialism. It also sounds like it's going to have some humor in it because we are following a woman who preparing for her wedding because a man proposed to her, and then it turns out that he was so drunk that he didn't actually remember that he proposed. So we'll see how that works out for them. Up next, we have The Sign for Home by Blair Fell. This follows a young man who is both deaf and blind, and he fell in love with a girl and he kind of thought he lost her forever, but then he sees some signs that she might still be out there, and so he sets out to look for her. I picked this up primarily for the disability rep, but I have also heard good things about it. Next, we have Riot Baby by Tochi Onyo Bucci, and this is a very short sci-fi story about a young girl who has the ability to see the future, and she's kind of been keeping this power to herself and not really using it. However, after her brother is arrested, she starts to think it's time for her to step up and bring about some change. We also have a bit of a cover by in Cat Shout for Joy by Shirley Rasu Murphy. This is like a cozy mystery, at least I'm assuming it's cozy mystery, where we are following a man and his furry companions as they try to figure out who is causing harm and even death in their community. The stakes are high because his furry friends are expecting their first litter, and obviously they want to bring them into a safe world. I also picked up A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is an author I've heard a lot about, but I have never read. This seems to be one of his more beloved stories. It's definitely like an exorcism story, so I am hoping that I enjoy it as well. Next, a book that was well beloved, I believe it was just last year, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Klewer. This is a story about a couple, a lesbian couple who moves into a new home, and then this man and his family show up, and the man says, "I used to live here. I'd like to show my family around." And they're like, "Sure, come on in." Why would they say that? I don't know. And then I believe things get a little crazy. And then the final book from Bellingham, we have Cuckoo by Gretchen Felker Martin, and this is a queer horror story that involves a conversion camp that I believe has some weird stuff happening in the desert around it, and follows some people who went there as teens and survived whatever was out in that desert, but it is up to them to prevent future harm. Next, a book that I have actually read, yes, most of these books I have not read yet, is Celestial Monsters by Aidan Thomas. This is the sequel to The Sunbearer Trials. It is a young adult fantasy story following a trans main character. Tons of great representation in here. I gave both the books 5 stars, and it is definitely worth checking out. Up next, we have The Corruption of Hollis Brown by Kay Ancrum. I read Icarus by this author this year and absolutely loved it. In fact, there it is, sitting on my favorite shelf. And so obviously I wanted to go ahead and pick up their new book. What is this about? I have no idea, but hey, look, Andrew Joseph White has blurbed it, so that's a good sign. All right, so it seems like our character here might have accidentally gotten himself possessed, and now it's up to his friends to potentially perform an exorcism on him. So, you know, good to have good friends who are willing to do that for you. I also have The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko. I did really enjoy Raybearer. I didn't like the second book as much, but I do know that I like the author's concepts and writing and characters. This is supposed to have House Moving Castle vibes, which is definitely something that will get me interested in a story. We seem to have a young woman who has the ability of Curse Eater, and her fate is apparently entwined with that of a crocodile god, but she is ignoring this crocodile god and heads off to this wealthy hotel and uses her abilities there in hopes of gaining favor with the wealthy people there. But it seems that her crocodile is set on revolution and she might just get caught up in it all. A couple sapphic YA stories that I picked up at Value Village. We have If Tomorrow Doesn't Come. This, I believe, is a sci-fi. I believe we have a character who is actually planning on taking her own life, but she finds out that there is a meteor that is heading to Earth and is going to destroy everyone. So she's like, you know what, might as well save my loved ones the suffering and just stick around. But I believe she also ends up meeting this girl and a connection forms. We then have the Falling in Love montage, and in this book I think we have a girl whose mother might be suffering from like Alzheimer's or dementia, and it is causing her to really want to keep her distance from people because she's worried that she will have the same fate as her mother. However, she ends up meeting this girl and they go on a bunch of different adventures together and fall in love, and she starts to open up and all that jazz. So hopefully these are a good time. Up next, I went to Barnes & Noble once and there was a local author doing signings, and obviously I couldn't just be like, no, I don't want your book. So I decided to go ahead and pick it up. It is called Flowers and Dreams. It is by Christelle Hart. I do believe this is a young adult story about a young girl here in the Pacific Northwest who starts to discover some secrets about her family and potentially some special abilities that they might have, and some people who are interested in hurting them. So we will see. It's not too long, but we do love to support our little authors here, especially our local authors. So I will see if I can get to this at any point. Last two books. First, we have All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. This one I believe was also a Value Village find. This I believe is a kind of mystery thriller in a historical setting. It might be dealing with a bit of a serial killer situation. And then the final book we have Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. Like I said, I did read his vampire book and really enjoyed it. So I decided to pick up another book of his, and this one has always intrigued me, just the way that it's set up, kind of like a IKEA catalog. I believe this is kind of sci-fi, where we have people who work at this horror store, and I think they need to like stay overnight because weird stuff keeps happening at night, and their manager wants them to like figure out what is going on. And it is obviously a horror book, so there's probably some creepy creatures and ghosts and whatnot going on there, and I am excited to see if I like it as much as his other book. All right, guys, wow, that went by relatively quickly because we didn't have as many books to go through. I have not read the majority of these, so let me know which ones you really enjoyed and want me to prioritize. Let me know any books you recently purchased that you are excited to get to. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!